great. So what would you say to people that are thinking about starting a YouTube channel, but they have doubts?
Um, be patient.
Be patient.
Yeah, yeah. I think it absolutely is worth it. And I think if you're in it for the long game, I think there really are, it's a high return platform. But it really takes a lot of time to start building traction. Um, and so I mean, I think I posted probably 50 or 100 videos before anybody started looking at it who wasn't like my husband or my mom and my piano students, right? Um,
Really? So how many videos do you have up there now?
oh
Would
gosh,
you
I
say?
don't, it tells you every now and then. I think it said that I uploaded 75 in 2024 because I just got this annual recap thing.
Hmm.
Um, but I think including shorts, because that's included in the count, it's got to be over 200 by now, I think.
Dang. Yeah. So in the beginning, so like the first 40 or 50, it's like double digit views, single like that kind of thing, like
Yeah,
maybe like
yeah,
a couple hundred or something.
yeah.
So yeah. So you just have to push through. I mean,
Yeah, and it can
yeah.
be frustrating because I mean, you know how it is. YouTube videos are a lot of work. It's not just sitting down and recording, but then there's sketching it out before you do that, and then all of the post that you have to do with the editing and thumbnails and so on. Um,
So how do you do it? I mean, do you script these things before you do it? Do you have a plan or you just kind of start talking?
I sketch out the topics and I have like a sequence of ideas that I always want to cover in a given month or in a 2 month span. I know some people do sketch things out really in detail, but I feel like when I try to do that, I end up very robotic
Hmm.
and it doesn't my voice doesn't really come through. And so I just kind of sometimes I sketch out an outline, especially when it's something like 10 things you need to work on or something like that, then I'll know what the things are before I sit down. um, but it's just kind of a general, like I think about it when I make the outline, and that's all of the pre-prep that I do.
Hmm. So you just have an outline, some talking points, and then you just kind of go. And then,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Hmm.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, super interesting. Did you have a long-term goal with this channel? I mean, in terms of what you want to accomplish? Like, so, I mean, in other words, how does that goal help you kind of push through that beginning period where nothing's really happening?
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest, I was hit or miss for a long time. Like it was,
Hmm.
you do get frustrated. And so that it would be like, oh, life's too busy. I'm just gonna table this for a while and then you come back to it. Um, but just working as a piano teacher, it's, you know, the drill. It's you only have so many hours. I'm mostly teaching school kids, so it's really like 3 or 4 hours after school, and that's your entire office hours. Essentially, it's really hard to get billable hours beyond that. Um, and I just want to help people. I really enjoy sharing knowledge, and I think there's a lot of things about music learning that everyone has the right to know, that you don't necessarily need to pay someone to hear. And so that's also a big motivator for me, but also just kind of developing my own platform, developing my voice, and kind of creating a presence for myself, so that I can start to build an audience and find people who are interested in learning through methods that aren't necessarily the conventional way to learn piano.
Hmm. And did you notice that consistency helped the channel grow? I mean, like you said, maybe you weren't as consistent as you wanted to be in the beginning, but did you start to develop a consistent routine with which you publish these videos and that did that help you?
Yeah, that definitely helps. And I mean, YouTube also says that it helps. And so, I mean, anytime they tell you things that are going to serve you on your channel, it's usually good to take that to heart. I think I started posting really consistently in September of this last year. And the first video was kind of an outlier and did really well, which I think I also kind of personally needed, because it was like, okay, this will go somewhere. And not every video took off like that. But then um, once I developed this consistent rhythm of I post every single Friday at noon,
Hmm.
um, and and kind of your audience gets trained and you start to pick that up. And then yeah, you do see the numbers vary. Not everyone's interested in all of the topics that you publish on, and so there's some deviation. But consistency definitely helps the videos take off a bit better also.
Hmm. I mean, it seems like you have a really nice community now. Like on all your videos, there's a lot of comments, and then you react
Mhm.
to the comments, like people. So it's not like you're posting these and then nothing happens. You get some
Mhm.
reaction for sure. So yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
So and you feel like that time, that specific time really matters too. The noon, like the same time every single week, that really does make a difference.
I don't know. And I don't hit it every single week over the Christmas holidays, for example. It was like, oops, I have to go cut my video and, and get it online. Um, it was still on the Friday, but not necessarily at the time that I usually post. I think there is something to be said for your audience does kind of get used to. I also send out my newsletter every week at the same time, and so it's always Mondays at 6 a.m. Eastern time, right? And so I think they do kind of get used to um, knowing when to expect something from you, and that just kind of encourages their participation also.
Interesting. Yeah. And and I just wanted to ask you about being comfortable on camera. Does that develop with time? I mean, how was it in the beginning for you? Is it easy for you to speak on camera? Did it become easier as time went on?
It definitely gets easier. It in the beginning, it really feels very painful, especially I, for example, I don't like recording when anyone is at home. The dog can be at home because he doesn't have anywhere else to go. But besides that, the house has to be empty. I don't like people actually watching me while I'm recording, which is also silly because I know that people will watch the videos, right? But I don't know, it feels different. Um, but I look back at the early videos and there is a learning curve also because things that I communicated in the videos, I mean, the teaching points are more or less still my current style, but you notice that I haven't quite learned how to talk to a camera yet. It all comes off as sort of two-dimensional, and because you kind of have to, when you're recording yourself, you have to oversell so that your personality comes through and so that it's not just a person blankly talking at a camera. And yeah, so I think that comes with practice. And then really the other thing that helped me a lot was, I mean, everyone says, oh, I hate watching myself on video, and I get that. But I think editing your own videos, at least for a certain amount of time, instead of just immediately outsourcing it because you don't want to watch yourself, that's where I've really learned the most. Is because then I see, okay, that didn't really land well, or that landed really well, and you just kind of start to notice what works for you and what doesn't, and you can kind of tweak your style from there.
Yeah, I've heard that from other creators too. Editing your own videos really makes a big difference because you get that
Mm.
feedback. But yeah, it's not easy, right? Listening to
It's
yourself
not
talk.
always fun, no.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's so interesting. So it's really you just get better with time, and it's just like you just got to keep doing it. So yeah, and one other point I wanted to ask you about in there with what you just said was the kind of the overselling it thing. Like, do you feel like you have to give like more than 100%? It's almost like you have to go like 150%, just be like a little bit more boisterous, a little bit more outgoing, and then that comes across as like normal almost,
Yeah, yeah,
in a sense. Yeah,
wholeheartedly, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I found that too for sure.
Mm.
Um, so what brought you to Europe? I mean, you grew up in the US, obviously, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I did. I
Mhm.
did.
What part of the US are you from?
I am from Kansas, like Dorothy.
Oh yeah. Like the middle of nowhere, Kansas, or like big city?
um, yeah, yeah. My hometown had the census says 150 people.
Uh,
You drive through the town and kind of wonder like, do 150 people really live here? But
uh-huh. Which part of the state is it? I was just curious. Like,
um, if you're familiar with Kansas, it's like 45 minutes southwest of Topeka, the capital.
uh-huh. Okay.
So like
Yeah.
northeast central.
Yeah. I was just
So
curious because I went there during the pandemic. I really liked it actually. It was
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Yeah. I stayed in
Great sunsets.
yeah. Oh yeah. It's
Mhm.
beautiful. Yeah, I stayed in Dodge City for like a week or something, and then kind
Okay.
of drove all over. Like drove to Manhattan, which was cool.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
yeah, nice place. I liked it.
Yeah, it's a great I especially think it's a great place to grow up.
Hmm.
It feels very safe as a kid there.
For
So it's
sure.
mhm.
So then did you go to college out there or did you leave?
I got my first bachelor's degree at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth.
Hmm.
Is
Great.
where I studied.
Nice, nice. And then you went
Yeah.
to Europe after that, or did that take a
Yeah,
few years?
I taught 2 more years in Fort Worth. I had my own private studio there, and was just teaching and learning German. And I, because one of my piano teachers, Helge Anthony is his name, he said, "Robyn, Berlin is the city for young musicians." And I'd always wanted to study in Europe at some point, and didn't necessarily care too much where. And I just kind of took him at his word and learned German and left.
Uh-huh. So you studied piano in Berlin as well?
No, in
But
Berlin, I actually studied communications.
mhm.
Mhm.
Awesome. So you knew German well enough to go through it.
Theory. The first year was rocky.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
first year was hard, but after that first year, I kind of got my feet underneath me and was good to go.
So you just knew you wanted to come to Europe for a long time beforehand. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think coming from a very small place, I just always wanted to see what was out in the world.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, I've always enjoyed playing Bach and Beethoven and Brahms, and so a German-speaking country was also kind of a logical step somehow.
I know.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with your teacher. It's I feel like Berlin is just the center of classical music. It's the capital, it's
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
the
I
most
mean,
is
the
going
Berlin
on. Yeah.
Philharmonic is just there. It's an incredible orchestra. I've never heard such unity from one ensemble before. It's
Yeah.
really something cool. Hmm.
Yeah, that's what kind of what brought me to Berlin too was the Berlin Phil. I mean, I'd been a fan forever, it's like
Yeah,
best
yeah,
forever. So,
yeah.
you know. And it's an amazing place. I mean, there's so many orchestras, so many concerts happening every single day. I mean,
Uh-huh.
easy to live, it's cheap. It used to be cheaper, but
Yeah, that's changing, unfortunately.
yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
it's a great city. A lot of
So when did you
opportunity.
leave Berlin?
Um, 2.5 years ago, so the
Hmm.
summer of 2022.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then what brought you to Vienna?
My husband started his PhD here. He is studying Byzantine studies. He deals with ancient Greek. He does spoken ancient Greek, which is also a very niche market.
Amazing.
Yeah, and so that's how we ended up here. He started his PhD.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Gotcha. Well, also like, I mean, an incredible music city. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Mhm.
Yeah. So you have a lot of piano students, and this is what you do. You perform and you teach students. I want to ask you, what's kind of the main pitfall that you notice with students, of all ages? Are there certain pitfalls that you tend to notice, like certain trends that come up that students deal with?
You mean like certain things that trip them up, or what do you mean
Yeah,
by?
just kind of like the main issues that kids deal with. But I can think of some personally, but what are the main
Mhm.
issues that, in terms of just overall, not necessarily piano related, but in terms of being a musician, what are the main pitfalls that people encounter?
Um, Maybe just so that I'm sure that I'm tracking with where you want to go with this. What's an example of something that you've noticed so that I can?
I mean, for me, for example, I noticed that consistency and just practice routines tends to be the main thing. It's just like a lot of, especially kids that are at a lower level, they have horrible practice routines. So, you know, that kind of
Uh,
thing.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's hard. We also live in a big, busy, flashy society anymore. And there are so many options, um, which for me as a kid in rural Kansas was kind of the saving grace of playing an instrument was I had something to do with my time after school, besides just because my parents didn't let us watch that much TV. They didn't list it that much on the computer. And so it was like, well, what do you do? Okay, I'll go practice. And I mean, today, every single kid has their own smartphone and they have their own tablet and they have their own laptop, and there's not necessarily as much restriction on their consumption there. And so I think, yeah, finding consistency and practicing is definitely one of the issues. Um, and just I don't know. I try to dedicate a lot of time in my teaching to teach them how to practice so that they at least can get the most out of their time at the piano. even if it's not very much. I have a few students who really, um, I actually stopped asking after a certain point how much they had practiced because it was like, yeah, so on Tuesday I practiced 5 minutes. And it was like,
Hmm.
you don't even sit down if you practice for 5 minutes, right? It's like you barely step to the instrument. But I'll be darned, they learn. If they have like tools that they know what to do when they sit down, they're at least able to get some things done with the limited time. Especially my students from Berlin. Berlin is a really busy city, and so there's a lot of after school activities that they can do, and they have a lot of things to choose from. And sometimes the only afternoon that they have time to actually sit at the piano is their lesson. And so,
Hmm.
uh, yeah, that's probably one of the bigger pitfalls.
Hmm.
Um,
So it's just knowing how to practice when you actually do get the time. Yeah, I mean, I noticed that with kids too. It's just they're so distracted. Everybody's so distracted. I mean, I feel that way too personally. It's just like your attention span is has been shortened over the years
mhm,
because that's how we're trained to think nowadays. So it's just like how do you accommodate that when you practice? And yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to ask kids to just sit down or students to sit down and practice for 3 hours undistracted. So
mhm,
it's yeah, coming up with a solid routine that accommodates kind of a new way of thinking, I guess you could say. And I mean,
uh-huh.
what are the main things that you tell students to practice with their limited amount of time? I mean, do you have like a routine that you recommend in terms of like switching from skill to skill, or what should they cover if they have a limited amount of time?
I mean, ideal would be I actually just published a video on this. um, that ideal would be for starters, you sit down and you play something you love because then you're already kind of enjoying the process and it's not like, oh, I don't want to do this. You've kind of already gotten over that hurdle. And then from there, just really quickly go through some basic skills that can help move the needle, that help you make progress on the things that are important. So I like to have students kind of work their way through the circle of fifths with scales. So I have them do a scale right after they do that, and then ideally some sight reading, and then maybe one other little exercise if they need it. And then from there, just go straight to the piece or pieces and be really intentional about how they're approaching it. So, I mean, always knowing what you want to work on, and then okay, so I'm working on these four measures. I've been struggling with the rhythm. I'm not quite clear on the notes yet. And so then they might want to go through hands separately, put it back hands together, and maybe speed up the tempo a little bit if they have time. And then hopefully, best case scenario, they play something they enjoy to wrap up the session. And then if they don't have more time, they're good to go, right? They can kind of just stretch out that third section of the active practicing as much as they need or want. Um, and using those tools that we learn in lessons about how to practice and how to get the most out of their time.
And how long does that routine take, or how long does that routine look like realistically?
I mean, if you're intentional, you could get through it in 10 minutes. Because
The
again,
whole
I have
thing.
a lot of students who say that they don't practice more than that. And I mean, I tell them sometimes that when I was in high school, I practiced between 3 to 5 hours every day. And then they look at me like I have two heads, right? Um, how is that even possible? Um, and yeah, but realistically, it doesn't have to take a lot of time, especially if you don't want to learn an hour-long program, and you're just there because you want to learn one or two songs. It can be enough, but
So
if you're having fun, you can also make it more.
so there's like you said so there's the intro which is playing something you like. So you just start off with that.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the beginning and then switch to scales.
Mm-hmm.
And so and then there's like three or four more components to that, right? The third one was um you said
Um, yeah, I kind of chunk the
depends.
scales together with a little bit of sight reading, and then
Oh, sight
maybe if
reading, yeah.
a technical exercise or anything like that, that would also kind of fall into that block.
Hmm.
And the third block, I have them work on their pieces. And then to finish, I think it's really good for habit building if we kind of end things on a positive note. And so I like to have them play something they like to wrap everything up as well.
Awesome. Are those sections timed out, with a timer or something, or do you just kind of feel when you're done with it and move on to the next one?
Um, I mean, I give them kind of time guidelines that if they really don't want to spend more time, they could set a timer and be done with it. But it's also it doesn't have to be something that's super strict. I think it's more important that you're just there and focused.
Hmm.
Um, Another pitfall that I've noticed with students is because I also had played around with trying to get them to use apps so that because I don't know, it's new, it's flashy, it's interesting. And I just found in the lessons anyway, whenever they would do that, that the concentration was just gone. The lesson was shot because and as soon as you get a device in your hand, you're in a different universe. And so I think setting a timer, what's that usually on? It's usually on our phones, and then in between sections, it's just going to be a complete waste of time.
I know, I know. I've noticed that too. Yeah, I have these timers on my phone, but yeah, when the phone is around you, it's so tempting to just grab it and look at it. So I find it most helpful. You just got to put the phone out of the room,
Uh-huh.
put it in a different room. That's the most
Yeah.
helpful, but it's hard to do. But yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's so interesting. So that routine is effective. I mean, if you do that every single, I mean, and then the consistency comes in. And so you can have a short routine like that, but you do need to have consistency or else it's just not effective, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Hmm. So what does consistency look like? Is that like every day? Is that 5 days a week? Is that 6 days a week?
I think most of them practice like 4 to 5 days a week.
Hmm.
I also have a few who just they practice in their lesson, and it's the parents have said, "Look, I can't get them to do more." And I think that has been kind of a difficulty with online lessons because in person, I have little notebooks and I just like write out the days of the week, and they're supposed to just put a check mark or the number of minutes that they put for each day. And then since I'm not there, I don't write out the table for them, and there's not this physical check. I did try setting up a software that they get their lesson notes, so I still write out the things that they're supposed to work on and how they're supposed to practice it. And then they get an email with all of those details every single week after their lesson. um, and there is a feature where they can enter their practice time, but nobody's ever done it, so
Hmm.
probably still need to keep playing around with those methods to find what works.
Yeah. That's so interesting that you teach this way because I've heard even the greats speak like this, meaning they have little blocks and the blocks are really short. They're like 5 minutes each or less even. And you just jump from skill to skill and you can knock out a bunch more skills rather than just doing one thing for 3 hours. It's like it's a much more effective way to practice. And you learn better that way too. So I feel like, it works with the way we think nowadays, but it's also just scientific based, right? I mean, it just works
Mm-hmm.
because it works. But
Mm-hmm.
um and I feel like, the thing about pianists is you always going through music school, pianists were the ones that practiced the most. It seems like it was like expected to practice. Like you hear stories of people playing like 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day as a pianist because I guess like you don't get as tired as playing piano, right? Like physically, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. I mean, is that a thing on piano? Does it require just a sheer amount of massive amount of time relative to other instruments, or is it just more you can really improve with just a minimal amount of time?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's been a long time since I've really sat down to think about it.
Hmm.
Um, I know, I think a lot of pianists when they're young have this really intense phase of practicing like ridiculous amounts of hours, like 8 to 10 hours a day, which is just, it's not healthy. After a certain point, you're not listening, you're not actually accomplishing anything. And so it's more manic practicing than anything else. And that's just really, in my opinion, generally unhealthy. And so I think it's not something that I would ever recommend to anyone. 5 hours is probably still entirely doable if you break it up well across the day. Um, but that's also going to depend on the person, and you can't go from practicing 1 hour a day to practicing 5 hours a day either overnight. Like you don't have the stamina, you don't have the attention, and so on. But the Chopin, I know that he refused to let his students practice more than 3 hours a day. And his students were not professionals, they were more like upper class in Paris, mostly women who this was just their hobby, but he forbid them from practicing more than 3 hours a day. So I mean, if Chopin said that, who are we to speak differently? No. But
Yeah, I've
yeah,
heard that
there
from.
there are certain advantages. I mean, you don't have to hold the piano while you play it. That's the big
Mhm.
advantage. Like that's how we can practice so many hours. It's this sort of motion and not actually sustaining an instrument in front of you, which I think is extremely taxing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've heard that from Itzhak Perlman too. Don't practice more than 4 hours a day. You should be able to get it all done. I mean, yeah, I
Mhm.
think I feel like the 8 hours a day approach is that's just old school thinking,
Yeah,
But I guess
yeah.
it works. It's just hard to say, does that really work or doesn't? I mean, there are periods of my life where I've been obsessed like that, and I actually did make a lot of progress being crazy
Hmm.
obsessed like that. But I don't know. I don't think it's sustainable throughout your whole life.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so. And in terms of practicing, how do you tell students to actually repeat? I mean, are there a certain number of repetitions they need to make on a particular passage before they feel like they know it, or before they feel like they can actually repeat it faster? How does repetition work with piano?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think, and I also fall into bad habits with that as a teacher because it's much easier, especially when you're writing out lesson notes, like right hand 3 times, left hand 2 times, hands together 5 times, right? It's succinct. But really, what's much more important is that on the repetitions, you're listening for specific things. Um, and that's it's always going to vary. There's not actually a formula that you can set up there. I think there is kind of a critical mass that you have to hit. It's going to be different for every piece, it's going to be different for every passage, and it's also going to depend a lot on what you've already played in your past and what you're familiar with and what you're comfortable with. Um, but but I think it's much more important to be intentional with the repetitions than to say, okay, I'm going to play this 20 times. If I can't do it by the time I played it 20 times, I'm going to do it another 20. Right? Like that doesn't actually get you anywhere because it's this mindless sort of you're just going in circles and not actually noticing what's going on. And I think that's really what's a lot more effective.
Hmm. So pay attention to each one, make sure that each one counts. And then
Mm-hmm.
do you put a space between each repetition? Because a lot of people they'll just play once and then like immediately go to the next repetition. It's just like a big mass of noise, and each one doesn't really count as much, right? So how do you tell
Mm-hmm.
students to work through that? Do you tell them to take some space in between?
Sometimes yes, sometimes I and it's easier in lessons too because then I can ask them the questions and I can get them to start thinking actively about what's going on. If they do that when I'm not there, I have no idea. That's also a different thing. It's a different animal, kind of independently practicing. Um, but so yeah, I build that into lessons, whether it carries over, and I try to impress upon them that it's important. um what I actually do when I practice is I usually keep coins on the piano, and I just for each repetition I move it across just so that I know how many times, and then in the moment that you're doing that, you kind of can reflect on, okay, this time I need to work on the fingering in measure 4, or this time I didn't like the balance, or I didn't like the articulation, and it's like it's just half a second, but it adds just a moment of consciousness to what you're doing and a conscious break from just repeat, repeat, repeat that I think can be helpful.
That's awesome. I got to try that. How many coins do you have? Is it the
5.
band?
I move them
Five.
back and forth.
So 5 coins, and then you bump the tempo up, or what do you do after the five? Or you move on to something else, or?
It varies every time. It usually I try to kind of intentionally set a goal for the next repetition, and and then sometimes I say, okay, I have 10 chances, and if I don't get done what I want to get done, I come back tomorrow. Um, it varies. I'm
Mhm.
not always very strict with myself either, but
And does it have to be five in a row correct? Or what happens if you make a mistake, say on repetition number three? What do you do? Do you go back to the beginning, or you just push through the five and then you like normal?
yeah, that's an interesting question. I do that with my students sometimes just because I can tell they're not paying attention and they're making silly mistakes because they're not paying attention. And so I say, nope, we got to start over. Then this is a great trick. Everyone should use this trick in their lessons. Although some people may say it's child abuse, but if they don't get it, I say, okay, if you don't make it by the third time, you have to do 5 push-ups. And I always offer the opposite. So, and if you do it, I'll do 5 push-ups.
Hmm.
And they just think it's hilarious to watch me doing to watch me do push-ups. But
So you
it
actually
works.
do the push you'll actually do the push-ups in the
I'll
lesson.
actually do them, yeah.
Okay.
And usually I'll always end up saying like, oh well, you get a muggins, right? You get one do-over. And so then that kind of saves them. And I'm always the one who ends up doing the push-ups anyway. But it gets them to focus. It gives them something that they're looking forward to that kind of knocks them out of this autopilot and encourages them to dedicate a bit more concentration.
So it is important to make sure each rep is a good one, not just one with filled with mistakes, because you can learn mistakes, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think you have to say, okay, I played the section 8 times and I made mistakes on 3 of them, and so those three just don't count because we also learn from mistakes, and I think there's also value in that. But we only learn from the mistakes if we notice that they're happening and we've actually stopped to think about, okay, why am I playing that wrong? And usually it's like, oh, I had the wrong fingering, or um, oh, my rhythm's off or my coordination's off. There's always a reason. And so if you can kind of reverse engineer to figure out why, then in my opinion, mistakes aren't the end of the world. We just have to stop and think about them a little bit.
Exactly, yeah. And then notice them, right? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Know that they happened in the first place. That's always a good start.
Yeah, I remember living in Berlin and the person above me was a pianist and they would play this passage over and over again and always make the mistake on the exact same spot. And this went on for like 2 months, and it was just like it drove you crazy, but it's just like, okay, why don't you just realize that this is where the mistake's happening and like work through it. But it was just like this, we can and we'll tend to do that sometimes, right? We'll just tune it out. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're so right. About it's really about paying attention and making sure each rep counts. And, do you ever record yourself when you practice, or do you encourage students to do that?
Um, I encourage people to do it. I know I should. This is one of the things that I know I should do that I know is extremely valuable. And I haven't been very good about putting into practice, to be honest.
I know, hard.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know. I find it's like you have to have that set up, and have it be frictionless, meaning like the recorder's
hmm
just there to do it. You just do
yeah,
it. But yeah, I totally agree. I've neglected to do that for so long, and it's just
mm,
yeah, it's just one of those things that you should do, but you don't do it.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
2025. This is the year we start doing
I
it.
know, every day. And in terms of practicing, how do you encourage students to think about when they should practice? Is there a certain time of day? Like, is that important to practice the same time every day or same kind of period of the day? And what do you do personally with that?
With my students, because I also think it's an important life skill that if kids learn it before they go off to college, they'll be really well served to think about, okay, what do I have going on in the week? And so I don't do it every single week that I kind of stop and brainstorm with them. But if they've had several weeks where they just haven't practiced at all, then I say, okay, what's going on this week? When can you practice? And then, okay, no, you can't practice on Tuesday because you have tennis. And so when can you practice? And kind of just trying to get them to think about their own schedules. Um, School is also really overwhelming, I think, right now. At least the students that I've had in Germany, they have so much homework and they have so many exams. And I think it's hard for them to find mental space for practice. And so I try to not be a stressor in terms of scheduling and just kind of try to help them find, okay, when could you practice? And then every now and then gently remind them, well, do you play video games every day? Because if you play video games every day, you can probably find 5 minutes to practice. Um, and then if it's the same time every day, that's going to kind of depend on the family what their schedule looks like. Because if they have different blocks that are available every single day, then they're going to have to try to chunk it together with something, right? I think it does work really well to say, okay, when I finish eating breakfast, which most people aren't going to practice before school, but I think it works really well. I finish breakfast and I go practice, or I finish dinner and I go practice. That you kind of combine it with something. It's a lot easier to remember to show up because I think there's also this phenomenon of, oops, the week is gone and I haven't practiced again. Um, yeah,
Exactly.
my
Yeah, the next day gets there real
right.
quickly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And then my personal practicing, it over the last year, it's been really loaded down with teaching. And so I haven't had as much time, but I'm also planning to be intentional this year. That's actually my plan for this year is to eat breakfast and then go practice and then get to work on everything else that I have going on.
Mm.
But yeah.
So you feel like it's important to tie it in to something you're already doing every single day, like eating breakfast or whatever. It's like you
I
just
think
you connect the two.
if you've been hit or miss, I think it really helps. It's just it's a thing from habit science that if we chunk a new habit together with an existing habit, we're much more likely to follow through. And like you say, also finding ways to remove friction. So if you need to leave 15 minutes after breakfast, then it's probably not going to be a good time for you because you're going to be stressed, you're not going to concentrate it. Um, and yeah, so I think but chunking it together can help a lot.
Do you do the double practice session like where you'll work on a few things in the morning and then later in the afternoon maybe come back to it? Or does that work for you? Because I know personally, like a lot of times I'll say I'm going to do two practice sessions, but the second one never happens, you know? Like, do you ever deal with that?
Um, I would love to have that setup. It's what I did all through high school. I would practice for 1 hour before I left for school. And then actually I somehow convinced my high school that I needed an hour to practice at school. So I got like a free period and would go to the music room and practice for an hour. And then I'd usually practice for 2 to 3 hours at home. So yeah, I think it works really well. I think it's extremely efficient. Um, my current life schedule doesn't really allow for that. I teach until almost 9 p.m. every night and live in an apartment, so my neighbors
Mm.
wouldn't really sustain that, I don't think, but it would be cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So you just got to knock it out in one session.
Mm-hmm.
Get it all done. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the quality of the system just really matters. You have to have a very finely tuned system and you
Mm-hmm.
knowing exactly what you're going to do with each minute. And that just helps because a lot of people, they don't know what they're going to do when they practice. They just show up and they just start playing and they don't have a plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. But there's an easy hack for that too, is that as soon as you finish practicing, just take 2 minutes to jot down what went well and what you're going to work on the next time. And then you automatically know where to get started. But there's this also this mental block of, okay, what am I going to do? And then feeling like you're wasting time sitting at the piano, not remembering where you wanted to start. But if you can just get yourself to remember to jot down a couple of notes as soon as you finish, um, it makes sticking to the habit a lot easier also.
mhm. So you live in these amazing music cities, Berlin and Vienna. Do you have time to go to concerts ever? Or?
Every now and then, I mean, I don't know if I think you play in orchestra, so maybe you don't relate to this at all. But to me, it like the weeks are so busy and I have a lot of work going on, and then like half the season is just gone before I realize it's even there. And then sometimes I'll see if like a flyer for a concert, and yeah, I really want to go to that, and then realize, shoot, it was 2 weeks ago. Um, but I do try to. What I really like to hear is every year at Christmas, Bach's Christmas Oratorio, and then at around Easter time, the Matthew Passion or John Passion, whichever one is. Matthew's Passion is a lot more common, but
Mhm.
I
Is
always try
there a
to.
certain orchestra that performs those every year or in Vienna?
In Berlin, yes, and in Vienna, not so much. It's gotten more popular. But that is an interesting thing where you see like that it's the some of the music that's performed, particularly like Bach's religious music, is much more popular in areas that are traditionally Protestant versus somewhere like Vienna that's extremely Catholic, and it's
Hmm.
not. They kind of prefer their Catholic masses here and Mozart Requiem.
That's interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
never thought of it from that angle.
Mhm.
So Bach is more popular in Berlin than in Vienna, basically.
I would say I don't want anyone to come at me on the internet, but that's what
Yeah.
I've noticed here.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you feel like Vienna is a little bit smaller in scale in terms of just what's happening? Like, is there a little bit less happening because it's a smaller city, right? And maybe there's less orchestras or.
Yeah, it's about half the size. And then the thing
Mhm.
about Berlin that you have to keep in mind is in Berlin, it has at least two of everything because it was divided for so long. And nobody was willing to give up their opera once the country was reunited, and nobody was willing to give up their orchestra. And so um, it made it a really attractive place for musicians to be because there are so many options that are available.
Exactly. I mean, there's
Um,
three opera companies. That's crazy, you know. Like, how does that even happen? 'Cause- and I mean, there's one in LA, but and they're part-time, you know. It's like this massive
Really, I
thing,
didn't
but
realize that.
yeah. Well, they're yeah,
Okay.
it's not even like a full-time job.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But and and in terms of when you perform, do you how do you think about mistakes? I mean, do you ever make mistakes when you perform, and how do you deal with that?
I never make mistakes. No. Yeah, I mean, and it's performance psychology is again another animal. I earn 98% of my living from teaching. I mean, I didn't perform at all last year, and so there's I think there's also something to be said for performing consistently, even if it's not something that you're charging entry for. Like I think it is really valuable to just flex that performance muscle and stay comfortable in that space because I gave a couple of concerts, I guess 2 years ago, and it was the first ones in a while because it's just I've been studying and I've been teaching and it's been a lot of different things going on, and it did not feel like it did in college, I have to say. But on the other hand, I have taken the time to start developing space around, okay, I'm not the pianist who's ever going to sit down and play a note perfect program. That's just I don't have the hours in the day to practice. I don't have the mental space to make that happen. And trying to navigate that with a bit of grace and not get too caught up in the details because really the audience doesn't care. They don't care if you play the wrong notes or not. They won't even realize that you played the wrong notes. Sometimes musicians in the audience don't even know what's going on, right? And so um, that's what I always try to keep in mind. But it would be fun to perform a bit more again, just to see how much of the mental work that I've put into that actually I can apply in practice because theory and practice are different.
Hmm. Do you feel like it's easier now than it was in college, or is it more difficult to perform?
Um, And on the one hand, I don't have the quantity of performances that I did in college, and so it's not I don't feel as equipped, like just in terms of focus and concentration, and just kind of being in that zone. Um, but on the other hand, I know I'm not getting graded, and that feels really great, and
I know.
that's really freeing. That it's okay if somebody didn't like it, you know what? It doesn't change my life. It doesn't. I will sleep perfectly fine tonight. So that's freeing.
And I wanted to ask you just about moving to a new city. So you were in Berlin, you moved to Vienna about 3 years ago, right? Was it?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, yeah.
how do you establish yourself in a new place? I mean, how do you reach out to people? How do you make contacts? You know, what do you do?
That's an interesting question. So in Berlin, I I worked at a music school where I met a lot of other teachers who are around my age, who are kind of in the same phase of life. And I also, through my roommates in Berlin, actually got connected into a really incredible community of people. And basically, I have my own little German family in Southwest Berlin, which is really cool. Um, and there I established myself fairly quickly and felt at home. I felt really at home in Berlin. In Vienna, I don't know. I think again, I'm just in a different phase of life. I'm not studying at the university anymore. I didn't want to teach at a music school because I was wanting to establish my own studio. Um, and then in the end, somehow ended up transferring most of my work online. And so I don't leave the house that often in Vienna. And so I think there are a lot of things that I could have or maybe should have taken advantage of. I think how I've navigated things is also it was kind of the time and place for me to do things the way I did it. But for other musicians who are looking at a big move, I think going to concerts is a really great way to meet people. And they're always musicians are always going to hang out somewhere. They check out the conservatory and just kind of find where do they go for a beer after they practice and just go hang out with people. I think can be a really great way to get integrated. Um, if you're not in that phase of life anymore, then there are also similar events for like freelance musicians in the city. So I think kind of leaning into those is really valuable.
Do you have to put conscious work into that? Because like you said, you spend a lot of time at home teaching piano. Do you have to actually put conscious work into like, okay, I have to go out. I have to actually put myself out there and go meet people. Is that like a thing, or does it just come naturally to you, kind of?
Um, Over the last 2 years, it has not come naturally to me, I have to say. But I've been, like I said, in a different phase where I'm developing the YouTube channel and I'm developing different methods of online teaching. And so I think it has been valuable to me to kind of isolate myself a bit. Um, Ironically, Haydn, who also was based in Vienna, said that I did well at what I was creating because I didn't have anybody around to distract me. Because he was off at the Schloss Esterhazy, right? He was off working for this royal family and wasn't necessarily in the city so much. And I don't know. I'm of the opinion that we have different phases of life, and that's where I
Yeah.
am right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Have you been there, by the way? Is that like an hour outside Vienna or
Esterhazy? I haven't actually. I should. Um, that's a good plan for the summer. That's
yeah, yeah.
when the weather's nicer.
I was actually just thinking about that. That's funny that you mentioned that because I was thinking about that reason. I looked it up, where is that actually? It's not too
Uh-huh.
far outside Vienna, I think, right? It's like
Yeah, yeah.
45 minutes or something.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Long time back then, I guess, but
Yeah, yeah.
oh.
And I mean, even the winter residence of the Esterhazy family is what is now basically in the middle of Vienna, but back then was considered like outside the city gates and kind of a questionable neighborhood. And
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, great. And I think I had one more question for you. Let me see. What was I going to ask? I had made a whole list here, but it was just like you don't know if you ever get to all of them and everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. Um, and I was just going to ask, piano, when you're playing piano, I mean, it's hard for me to think pianistically because, I play a single line instrument. I play bassoon,
Mhm.
but on piano, do you almost have to think symphonically? I mean, do you have to hear each part at a time? I mean, can you hear all the different parts that are happening at the exact same time? Meaning, so you might play a piece with four or five parts happening simultaneously. Do you listen to each one of those parts as kind of a whole hitting your face, or do you kind of listen for each individual one while you practice and kind of just play them? You know, I don't know if that question makes sense, but
Yeah, it makes sense. And I'd say yes. It's kind
uh-huh.
of yes to all of it. Like when you're practicing, it's sometimes you're going to be listening really intensely on to one voice, especially the voice that you need to be bringing out. Because that's the other annoying thing about the piano, right? You're the entire orchestra, and so you have to. Um, it's not just the conductor says violins, you're too loud. We need to hear this guy. It's you're all of those guys at the same time, and so it's kind of a yes and.
Hmm.
Um, in practicing, I think it's really important to kind of filter out like through the different layers of the music. Um, but then when you're performing, probably thinking more orchestrally and just kind of listening to the sound as a whole. I grew up playing flute and singing also. That was a different lifetime. I don't do either of those things now, but I also tend to be quite melodically oriented, for example. But I know that a lot of people who grew up playing guitar before they started playing piano are really harmonically oriented. And so I'm thinking about harmony while I'm playing, but I'm not necessarily the expert at listening to the harmony. I'm always as a person much more melodically oriented.
Do you find singing helps as a skill in terms of playing piano? Like, do you find that the students that can sing are just more naturally, do they play more naturally in a sense?
I think they're less prone, not always, but in general, less prone to kind of this typewriter piano playing that it's like note, 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 note. And they're much better at listening for a line and giving direction to the line, um,
Yeah.
which is another difficulty in piano playing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that with students too. I mean, the ones that are kind of tone deaf, things become, it's more about technique for them. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
if you have the sounds in your head,
Mm-hmm.
just trying to recreate those sounds through your technique, and
Mm-hmm.
technique becomes more like a means to an end rather than just an end in itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah, that's one thing with the I mean, even for me on bassoon, I once I started singing a lot more, my playing improved a lot because you have
Mm-hmm.
that kind of the notes in your head.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
so you don't recommend that do you ever recommend that to students? You should start singing a little bit or sing a line of music that you're learning or something.
I try as a teacher to be sensitive because I've seen that really backfire in master classes. I won't name the professor, but it's a well-known professor, and she told a student to sing a violin line in a master class. And the poor kid, he was in front of all of his peers, and he was so scared, and it was just so traumatizing for him. And so I saw that, and I as a teacher decided, okay, I will tell them if they want to sing, they can, and I will encourage them to do it on their own at home. But I know, like, the other thing about singing is it's extremely personal because it's not just the music that you love and that you're making, but it's coming from your body. And I think it can very quickly go awry
Hmm.
if you're
Yeah,
asking people to sing. I think it is really important. I think if we want to learn to play more musically, it's essential. Um, Especially composers who were so inspired by the human voice, like Chopin, right? But just in general, music is some level inspired by singing, I think.
definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. It helps a lot. But yeah, I mean, a lot of that is too is training the muscles to sing well. And if you don't have the muscles to be able to sing well, you can't sing well, right? So it's not just
Uh-huh.
innate to a lot of people. So yeah, asking them to sing on the spot like that, there's range issues, there's all kinds of weird things. So yeah, it's tough, right? So yeah, I mean, I'll teach ear training. I don't ask kids to sing, but a lot of
Mm-hmm.
them, I realize that it's they can only sing in a certain range, and that's just
Mm-hmm.
the body, so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So so consistency is just a huge thing, and so that's kind of the main thing that you see with a lot of kids is just developing a consistent practice routine and just executing it every single day. And if you do it every single day, it's going to help, right? So
Yeah.
developing that
Yeah.
like that efficient system.
Mm-hmm.
So so you recommend a certain amount of parameters, meaning like you have like 5 or 6 basic like overall areas that you have to cover every single day. Does the list ever expand from there? Meaning, does it get more micro, or is it mainly just like 5 minute blocks of just general chunks of playing?
Um, yeah, I mean, ideally it expands and you
Hmm.
bring in, you start noticing, okay, I need to work on rhythm here. And I'm also a big fan of using our pieces to create exercises, and so not going through stacks of Hannon and Cherny, but just kind of thinking about, okay, in this piece I'm struggling in these 4 measures, and how can I turn this into an exercise that I can practice like a bit more in a way that just kind of gets me higher return on the practice. But yeah, and so if someone's looking at starting to practice more time each day, then of course you can cycle in more things, and you can cover more ground, because there are a lot of skills that go into music playing, music making. It's not just reading the notes and understanding the rhythms and moving your fingers the right way. It's a lot of stuff that has to all work together. And so ideally you can find ways to incorporate more of that in each practice session. But I don't know, I feel like school kids, it's hard to get them to practice more than 15 to 20 minutes a day. And so then it's really a matter of, okay, just take these things and run with it. What I found though is I also work with a lot of adult beginners or adult intermediate students, and then they love practicing, and they'll often practice 30 to 45 minutes in the morning and 30 to 45 minutes in the evening. And then um, I don't micromanage too much. I try to give them good parameters for how to approach their pieces and give them feedback on things they can be working on. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that have to sit down and do it too. So
Great, great.
that's kind of my approach.
Yeah, super helpful advice for anybody that doesn't have a lot of time or that is just trying to fit it into their busy day, because we all can't live that ideal musician lifestyle. So a lot of times you just gotta, even for musicians, I mean, you just gotta be able to fit it in sometimes. We're really busy
Mm-hmm.
and
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I have a 30-minute practice routine that I get through and it covers all my bases and I improve and it's just 30 minutes a day. I mean,
Hmm.
that's not ideal, but yeah, you can definitely make progress, right? With
Hmm.
that little amount of
Hmm.
time. Yeah, awesome. Well, I'll let you go, Robin. It's probably really late over there right now. And what time is it? 9?
It's 8:30. 8:30.
8:30. Okay, that's
Yeah,
not too bad.
not too bad.
Okay. Well, anyway, yeah, we got some good stuff here, and so thanks so much. Thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.